Chapter 51. Ray's attention flitted over the boulders and earthy mounds she was sprinting over. On the one hand, she was running as fast as she possibly could. The ricochet of bullets around her was not letting up. But on the other hand, she was also running down a seriously steep hill, and it was getting difficult to control her speed. One false step, and she'd go flying. Break a leg, crack her head. They'd be on her in a heartbeat. Arms out, like a tightrope walker, teetering somewhere between critical speed and critical balance. Ray hopped over a small bush. The moment it was under her, she realised she had misjudged. There was a hollow behind the bush she hadn't seen, and her leg hit the ground too straight. Ray felt her knee lock and bend the wrong way. She twisted and screwed around, half spinning, half falling into a full turn that prevented her leg from snapping in two. Running, skidding downhill, her knee now dead and dull, she saw the man with the cloven thumb farther down and followed him into a copse of stumpy, wind-swept birch, as a round shattered the narrow trunk of a nearby tree. Clawing through the branches, swinging between the trunks like an ape, she sensed he was nearby. "Left here," he said, somewhere near her shoulder. She swung left around a tree trunk, and a spray of bullets spat over the rocks she'd just ran over. "Stop, crouch." She obeyed, and in that instant, the clearing she'd been about to run through exploded in a cascade of earth as a mortar shell landed there. "Go." She pelted through the clearing before the last bits of soil landed. "Not that way." He gripped her collar and tugged her from the cack of bullets. Ray glanced over and saw the man with the cloven thumb jerk unnaturally as his shoulder exploded. He dropped in an instant. She didn't stop. Running, leaping, swinging, clawing her way down the hill, she wasn't worried about him. He'd done this a few times already. And sure enough, the moment she crashed out of the birch copse, he was beside her again, waiting for her, his shoulder whole once more. "Dead meat," she panted. "Shut up. Dive over that boulder." She slapped a hand over the top of it and cleared it with her momentum. The instant Ray's feet hit the dirt, a deep boom pounded the ground and air. She crouched on the lee side of the granite boulder as the explosion shredded her surroundings and tore the breath from her. Well, folks, this is terrifically exciting, isn't it? I mean, I do this every day, and I'm not ashamed to say that my heart is in my mouth right now. Isn't she something? Come on, people, let's hear it for Amida's Mystery Lady. And what about the 14th down there? They are trying so hard. This may be their first excursion, but they're certainly putting everything into it. Now, let's see. Yes, while the 14th is struggling to keep up with her, you can probably just make out the 72nd down there, about 10 degrees, bit less. They still need to lug themselves over that rise, but they should make it before she gets there. If they're smart, they'll wait for her to come to them. The news came over the comms of an attack on the exile camp, and Antonio faltered. "You okay?" The cold shock draining down Antonio's face concerned the young newbie. It didn't bode well. "We need to..." Antonio looked vaguely into the mid-distance and frowned. "We need to..." Then came the communication about a lone woman heading directly towards them. Surely it was Perdita. In trouble. On the run. The 72nd Centurions didn't waste a moment and immediately organised their tourists for a snap ambush. Most of the rabid desk jockeys insisted on staying put to find cover amongst the trees and boulders. They all wanted to be in the kill group. Before them lay an area of open grassland, flanked on either side by low cliffs. This would be the kill zone. When the quarry arrived, it was a game of who'd be the quickest and most accurate mark. The Centurions also selected a small group of disgruntled tourists to push ahead to the right and form a cut-off group to pen the quarry in. Some of them already composing the bad review they'd post online once the excursion was over. The Centurions also wanted a trigger group. Antonio had no problem volunteering himself and the newbie to push up the left flank. Their task was to spot the target and alert the others of their imminent arrival. No one else wanted such a boring duty, but Antonio ran straight off to locate a decent position at the base of the low cliffs ahead. It had to be Perdita and his unborn son, and they wouldn't last a moment in such a professional ambush. From their advanced position, Antonio could misdirect the others, perhaps provide her with some cover. Ducking down into a hollow lined with old tree trunks, a thought occurred to him. Drones were hanging around everywhere, unseen, and they'd correct any misinformation he might relay. Antonio flicked through the documents on his eyeline to the folder of sepses he'd prepped. He engaged and broadcast the first, a stream of code that dutifully found the nearest drone, which in turn spread to all the other machines and AIs connected to the excursion's network. Without warning or alarm, all comms went down. There'd be no trigger message for the kill group now, no coordination between them at all. And if the excursion got twitchy from the sudden silence, then the next sepsis he infected them with would get them downright panicked. He pressed send, and within a moment it neutralized all AI and drone defenses. The Centurions were alone now. No air support, no intel, no drone shields. Just a few pros with a troop of clueless, bloodthirsty amateurs who, around about now, would be stunned by all the alarms and warnings about their downed defences. A jumpy bunch of middle-aged men, armed to the teeth, trigger-happy, ungovernable, and, for the first time, scared shitless. Ray was exhausted. Sprinting through scrubland like this took everything she had. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. What hope remained was draining fast. I can't. You can. The man with the cloven thumb leant into her as they sloshed through a stretch of waterlogged moss and heather, steering her around a mere that would have stopped her in her tracks. Where are we going? Down. He prodded her in the back, and she fell into the saturated undergrowth as machine gun fire trimmed the foliage above her. He gripped her collar again and sucked her out of the mud. We're heading down the valley, not far. We'll find somewhere to hide in those bogs. Ray was way too fucked to argue, so she slopped and staggered on, tripping, slipping her way down the hill. Only a flat bit of grassland to go before the last drop to the valley floor. And yes, they're in position. See how the Centurions have got the 72nd distributed. There is literally no angle of escape down there. Total professionals. That's what it's about, people. Minimizing uncertainty, maximizing opportunity. Now, just ask yourselves, if that were you down there, which weapon would you choose? Check out your man at 60 degrees, tucked in behind those boulders. Looks like he's plumped for an executive package, so he's packing all kinds of fun. Bring his stats up, see what he chooses. Oh, it's not working. Sorry, folks. But, well, the point is, what would you use? Reckon I'd use a snare pulse first. She's agile. That'd give you some wide shrap fire distribution. Take her down. Then, if she's still breathing, you could follow up with something more spectacular. Not long now. We'll swing around this way for a better view, okay? Here she comes. Hasn't got a clue. Antonio snapped the image enhancer out of his face and back into his helmet. It wasn't Perdita. Good thing she wasn't staggering into this bloodbath. But where was she? Had she even survived the assault on the camp? And even if she was all right, what about the baby? He had to move. Oh, is that the target? The newbie pointed at the exhausted, mud-sodden woman staggering through the grass. Oh, yeah, listen, kid, I've got to go. He was tapping away at his eyeline again. The newbie had his finger in his ear and looked worried. I'm not getting any response from the rest of the team. Do you think, I mean, maybe should I shoot her? Antonio released the third sepsis, the one that incapacitated the location tracking on the devices he was carrying. He was off the grid. Yeah, sure. He hesitated. Hang on, wait. Antonio needed to keep the excursion distracted. Best if no one noticed his absence for as long as possible. Actually, no. That's the kill group's job. You see these? He patted the smoke bombs and flashbangs the young exec had strapped to his webbing. Use your grenade launcher to send as many of them into the kill zone as you can. Over there. Do it now. Antonio turned and left, leaving the nervous young man to fiddle cack-handedly with his weaponry. Ray was breathing so hard she couldn't speak anymore. The patch of ground she was blundering over was marginally easier than some of the terrain she'd already covered, but it was flat here, and she didn't have the advantage of gravity pulling her downhill. And the grass was long and thickly woven, and her knee was throbbing like buggery. All she wanted to do was to stop moving, sit down, lie down, damn it. Somewhere in her thudding brain, Ray knew they were on her tail, hunting her, but she didn't know if her body could carry her much further without stopping for a break. A few loud reports sounded nearby. She couldn't tell if they were shots or her own heartbeat in her ears. Either way, Ray was nothing but relieved when the man with the cloven thumb pushed her to the ground and told her to stay still. On her back, in the long grass, her muscles flooded with thanks at the respite she'd granted them. Dripping with sweat, she panted and gasped for oxygen, vaguely aware of a bank of white smoke drifting over her pulsing vision. Patrick Delamonte, just call me Patrick, was also sweating profusely. This was turning out to be a heck of an excursion. 1 in a million. And he hoped the bus was capturing some decent footage. This was the sort of action they used in the adverts. His commentary had switched from manic and loud to a hushed, restrained murmur. He almost whispered into his microphone. Well, people, could this get any tenser? There she is, right in front of the 70-second. There's smoke over the whole kill zone. Shouldn't make a difference. The drones have her position. but no one is firing. A centurion tactic, no doubt, and right there behind her, yes, right there. He was practically squeaking now. The 14th is on her. They're almost standing on her. No idea why they aren't picking her up firmly. This is incredible. Really, quite a spectacle. And yes, wouldn't you know it, the cut-off group are now manoeuvring around on the flank over there. They must know where she is. The snare is tightening, folks. Unbelievable. I'm curious. Does this sort of thing get you wet, or what? The man with the cloven thumb was lying next to Ray. Her breath had come back to her, and the unmistakable sounds of soldiers creeping through the grass were getting more audible. They were close, very close. Ray was utterly petrified. She just lay there, white as a sheet, staring into his eyes, desperate for some hope. I don't know about you, he continued, but I am so fucking horny right now. This is what it's all about, isn't it? Oh, bloody Nora. She stared inexplicably at him. Was this a nightmare? Was she asleep? He winked at her. Stay with me, you big lummox. In a moment, there's going to be an awful lot of gunfire. And are you listening? She nodded forlornly at him. And I know this is counterintuitive, but you're going to stand up. She shook her head. Yes, you are. You are going to stand up, and you're going to run directly towards the gunfire. He pointed ahead of them. That way. He was insane. Of course he was. Not long now. If you stay here, they'll find you and kill you. If you run away back there, you'll run into another trap. They're flanking us. The safest place is behind the ambush. It's the only way. He snuggled in, even closer to her, practically nose to nose, eyes alive with excitement. It'll be chaos, Ray. I promise you. The delight was practically beaming from him. And chaos is where I live, baby. That's my thing. Now, are you ready? She had no reasonable response. Reason had abandoned her, which only left. Somewhere ahead of them, a lone rifle cracked the silence. There was a beat. Then gunfire opened up everywhere. The burr and whip of weaponry let loose from all directions. Ray nodded to herself, smiled ever so slightly, and stood up into the drifting smoke. She noticed it curling into delicate eddies around her as bullets zipped through the air. She saw the orange and yellow flare of machine guns lighting up ahead, like fireworks exploding in the fog. Eyes wide open, pupils totally dilated, Ray ran straight at them. What a spectacle! Patrick Delamonte, you can call me Patrick, was clambering over the seats on the bus, his face pressed against the glass. They've all opened fire. A coordinated move, no doubt. He remembered himself and slipped back into sales mode. Now, I know this looks dangerous, people, but don't worry. With the shielding provided by our defence drones, you could be in the thick of that and come to absolutely no harm. The bus fell silent. After a stunned moment, someone gasped. Then a grenade detonated and sent a hail of earth, foliage, and the shredded remains of 3 tourists over the bus. 50-odd sightseers screamed in unison. They scrabbled over each other in a feverish panic, desperate to get somewhere, anywhere, but with no idea where that place was. Patrick Delamonte, you can call me Patrick, stared agog. Alarms he'd never heard before wailed through the uproar, and the bus swung sharply away from the macabre scene below. His mouth flopped open, and he found himself saying, "And that about wraps it up for this afternoon, people. Yes, I guess we'll be back at the depot in a few minutes. It's probably worthwhile mentioning the lawyer drones. They'll want to have a quick chat before you leave, so, yes. Amida, you have a question." If the tour bus had stayed put, if through all the bloody mayhem playing out on the battleground, the sightseers had kept track of Ray's dash through the gory slaughter below, they'd have borne witness to a spectacular and audacious escape. Her timing was, of course, exquisite. She broke cover amongst the ranks of the 14th as they waded through the grassy kill zone. Having chased her all the way down the hill, they now paid her no mind as enemy fire opened upon them, something nobody had warned them of, and, against all worldly logic, they were taking casualties. Suddenly their survival was at stake, and they didn't spare another thought for Ray, directing fire at their attackers instead. The Centurions of the 72nd were a professional bunch and had ordered the members of their kill group to hold fire. With their defences and comms down, they were only too aware of the gravity of the situation, but the bollock-brained middle managers on this excursion had cracked under the pressure. The lone target had not arrived as expected. Then their defences went dark, alarms started flashing and sounding in their helmets, and without warning, covering smoke had spewed all over the terrain, out of which what appeared to be hostile figures headed stealthily towards them. A quivering facilities manager had been the first to lose their nerve. He let off a round. Then bedlam broke out. Blue on blue. Which meant Ray was no longer the only target. As she pegged it through the grass, a few hysterical tourists raised their shaking rifles and had a pop at her. But only a few. And somehow she'd managed to duck and dive and stop and sprint at just the right moments to avoid getting hit. Only 2 members of the kill group saw her run the last few metres to their position, and they were so perplexed they hadn't the wits to shoot her. As soon as Ray had broken their line and disappeared into the foliage behind them, they'd swiftly turned their attention back to the real threat.